Hi guys, tonight we walk into a place where the cold bites before you even realise it. You're standing on frozen ground, your breath puffing out in soft white clouds, the air so sharp it feels like it might crack if you inhale too deeply. Snow creaks under your feet with that unmistakable sound that only comes when temperatures plunge far below comfort. The sky's pale and wide and the wind does not care about your plans. You probably won't survive this, not without help, not without knowledge passed down over generations. That is the quiet reality check as you look around and realise there are no trees tall enough to block the wind, no caves waiting politely for shelter. Just earth. Cold, stubborn earth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you are listening right now, tucked into bed or stretched out on a couch, drop a comment later, telling me where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights and let yourself imagine stepping forward into this landscape, because the story does not pause. It simply moves the way winter always does. You begin to understand almost immediately that survival here is not about fighting nature head-on. It is about cooperating with it, even surrendering to it a little. The ground beneath your boots is frozen solid at the surface, but you can sense intuitively that deeper down something changes. The earth holds a memory of warmth, a slow, steady heat that lingers long after the sun has lost its strength. Native American communities across North America figured this out long before modern science put numbers to it. One widely accepted historical fact is that soil temperature remains far more stable than air temperature, even during brutal winters. You do not need a thermometer to feel that truth. You just need to dig. As you kneel and brush snow aside with your hands, you feel the difference almost immediately. Beneath the crust of ice, the soil is firm but not lifeless. It smells faintly mineral damp and oddly comforting. This is where the idea begins. Not as a grand architectural plan, but as a simple realization that the earth itself can be a wall, a blanket, a shield. You imagine people centuries ago reaching the same conclusion, their fingers numb, their children shivering nearby, and someone saying without words, what if we go down instead of up? Historians still argue whether this shift toward underground living came from a single cultural innovation that spread, or whether multiple groups arrived at the same solution independently. It is one of those debates that sounds academic, but really it speaks to human creativity under pressure. Either way, by the time you picture entire communities settling into winter routines, underground homes are no longer experiments. They are proven. You take a slow walk across the imagined site of a winter village. From above there is almost nothing to see. Snow stretches unbroken, interrupted only by faint depressions and small openings. This invisibility is not an accident. One quirky detail that often surprises people is that some underground homes were intentionally camouflaged to blend with the winter landscape, not just for warmth, but for safety. Enemies, human or animal, could pass by without ever realizing families were living just beneath their feet. It is stealth housing centuries before the term existed. You pause near one of those openings. Warm air drifts upward, barely visible, carrying the smell of smoke and cooked food. Inside, the temperature difference would feel miraculous. Modern studies suggest that earth lodges and pit houses could maintain interior temperatures dozens of degrees warmer than the outside air even without constant fire. That mainstream fact explains why these structures were not temporary fixes. They were central to survival. As you imagine lowering yourself inside, you notice how quiet it becomes. The wind fades to a dull whisper. Sound behaves differently underground, softer, more contained. You can almost hear the muffled rhythm of life continuing below, while the storm rages above. This is not just shelter. It is a psychological refuge. There is something deeply calming about being surrounded by earth, like being held. Of course, not everything about this choice is universally agreed upon. Scholars still debate how early some of these underground structures appeared, and whether climate shifts forced rapid adoption or gradual experimentation. The evidence is literally buried, and time does not preserve wood and soil kindly. Archaeologists piece together clues from post holes, compacted floors and ash layers, reading the ground like a quiet diary. Sometimes they disagree, and that disagreement keeps the story alive. You stand there a moment longer, letting the cold sting your cheeks while your imagination stays warm below. You realise that going underground is not a retreat. It is an adaptation, a clever, patient answer to a harsh question. How do you live when the world above freezes solid? You listen to the wind again and feel grateful that others figured it out long before you had to. As you take your first mental step downward toward the hidden warmth beneath the snow, the story settles into a slower rhythm. There is no rush now. Winter is long, and so is the knowledge required to endure it. You're only at the beginning, with cold earth under your feet, and the promise of shelter waiting just below. You stay close to the ground now, almost instinctively, as if standing tall wastes heat. The cold does not ease just because you understand it better. It presses in, steady and patient. Winter in these places is not a short inconvenience. It is a season that shapes decisions months in advance. You begin to sense that underground homes are not sudden inventions made in panic, but the result of long observation. People watched snow pile up, watched rivers slow and lock into ice, watched animals disappear into burrows and dens. Before walls, before warmth, there was watching. You imagine earlier winters generations back when shelters were lighter and more exposed. Skin tents, brush structures, wooden frames. They worked in mild seasons, but when temperatures plunged and winds howled across open land, those shelters demanded constant fuel and constant attention. Fires had to burn almost endlessly, and even then the cold crept in through seams and shadows. One well-known historical reality is that fuel scarcity shaped winter survival as much as temperature itself. Trees were not always plentiful, and hauling firewood through deep snow was exhausting and dangerous. Every log burned above ground was a resource that had to be replaced. You picture a small group huddled together, listening to the wind claw at their shelter. Someone notices how the ground beneath them feels less cold than the air around them. Someone else remembers how roots survive underground, how animals emerge alive in spring after months below the frost. These observations accumulate quietly like snowdrifts. Eventually the idea forms that survival might depend on using the land not just as territory, but as material. The climate itself pushes the thought forward. Across much of North America, winter temperatures historically dropped far below modern averages during certain periods, especially during what scholars call the Little Ice Age. That mainstream climatic fact means entire regions faced longer, harsher winters for centuries. It is no coincidence that underground housing traditions intensified during these times. When weather patterns shift, architecture follows. You step through time slowly imagining trial and error. Early attempts might have been shallow pits with coverings that collapsed under snow. Moisture seeped in, smoke lingered. These were not perfect solutions, but they taught valuable lessons. Dig deeper, reinforce the roof, angle the entrance, place the fire carefully. Knowledge grows by surviving mistakes. There's a quirky detail that often surprises people. Some early underground shelters were reused year after year, with families returning to the same winter homes seasonally. Over time, these spaces became layered with memory, soot and repairs. In some archaeological sites, you can see floors raised gradually as debris accumulated, showing just how long people committed to these places. They were not desperate hideouts. They were planned returns. You feel the pressure of winter on daily life. Food storage becomes critical. Underground spaces help there too. The earth stays cool but not freezing, preserving dried meat roots and seeds. You imagine the relief of knowing supplies will last. Survival is not just about staying warm tonight, it is about making it through months when hunting is harder and gathering nearly impossible. Historians still argue whether the push toward underground living was driven more by climate or by social factors like population growth and territorial stability. Some suggest that as communities became more settled, investment in durable winter housing made more sense. Others point to climate data as the primary force. The truth, as usual, probably lies somewhere in between, buried under layers of soil and time. As you continue walking through this mental landscape, you notice how the horizon feels emptier in winter. Travel slows. Communication between groups becomes limited. Staying put is safer than wandering. Underground homes support that decision. They anchor communities to specific places, turning winter from a season of fear into a season of endurance. You listen to the sounds again. Above ground, the wind is relentless. Below, it is muted, distant, almost irrelevant. The earth absorbs not just cold, but noise. That quiet matters. It allows rest. It allows stories to be told without shouting. It allows children to sleep while storms rage overhead. There is also a social shift happening here. When people commit to building into the ground, they commit to cooperation. Digging is labour-intensive. Roof supports require planning and shared effort. You cannot easily build alone. One anthropological observation often mentioned is that underground housing correlates with stronger communal bonds during winter months. Survival becomes collective by necessity. You imagine the smell of damp earth mixed with smoke, the low glow of firelight reflecting off packed soil walls. It is not luxurious, but it is secure. And security in winter is everything. You realize that warmth is not just physical, it is emotional. Knowing that the structure around you will hold through the night allows muscles to relax, breath to slow. Some scholars question whether underground living limited mobility too much, potentially making communities vulnerable if resources failed. Others counter that seasonal movement balanced this with people returning to lighter shelters in warmer months. That debate continues, shaped by new findings and reinterpretations of old sites. You pause again, feeling the weight of winter and the quiet determination it inspires. These homes are not about hiding from the world. They're about aligning with it, using gravity, soil, and patience as allies. Before walls, before engineered warmth, there was an understanding that the land itself could be shaped into shelter. As your thoughts drift deeper, you sense the next step forming, the act of digging itself, hands in soil, tools scraping stone, the slow transformation of ground into home. Winter still waits above, but below the idea of warmth is already taking shape. You finally kneel and commit to the act itself. Digging. There is something grounding about it, literally and mentally. Your hands press into soil that resists at first, then slowly gives way. You imagine the rhythm developing over hours and days. Scoop, scrape, lift. The sound of earth being moved is dull and steady, almost soothing. In winter preparation, digging is not rushed. It is deliberate because mistakes here follow you all season. You picture the earlier stages of an underground home taking shape as a shallow depression, just enough to break the wind. From there, depth increases gradually. People learn how far down to go before hitting groundwater, how the soil changes colour and texture as you descend. One mainstream historical fact is that many Native American groups possessed intimate knowledge of local soil layers, knowing which depth stayed dry and stable year-round. That knowledge is not written, it is remembered. You pause to consider tools. No metal shovels, no machinery. Bone antler, wood and stone do the work. A shoulder blade from a bison becomes a digging implement. A sharpened stick prees compacted dirt loose. It sounds primitive, but it is effective when paired with patience. A quirky detail that often surprises listeners is that some digging tools were polished smooth over time, by repeated use becoming personal objects passed down through families. Digging is work, but it is also tradition. As the pit deepens, decisions multiply. Circular or rectangular, wide and shallow or narrow and deep. You sense these choices are not random. Circular pits distribute pressure, evenly reducing collapse risk. Rectangular spaces are easier to divide internally. Archaeological evidence shows both forms depending on region and purpose. Historians still argue whether shape choice was primarily cultural or driven by soil mechanics. Either way, the results are remarkably consistent in their effectiveness. You imagine the smell intensifying as you go deeper, earthy cool with hints of roots and minerals. It is a smell that signals safety, a break from the cutting air above. As walls rise around you, the world narrows. The sky becomes a distant circle overhead. Already the wind feels less aggressive. One often overlooked fact is that digging underground homes was rarely a solitary act. Entire families, and sometimes whole communities, participated. Children carried away loose soil. Elders supervised placement and depth. This collective labour mattered. It spread knowledge and ensured everyone understood how the space functioned. Underground living required shared responsibility. You picture the soil being piled nearby, saved carefully rather than discarded. That earth will return later, packed onto roofs and walls for insulation. Nothing is wasted. This reuse is intentional and efficient. Modern sustainability advocates would nod approvingly, though they are centuries late to the idea. As the pit reaches its intended depth, attention shifts to stability. Walls are smoothed and sometimes lined with wood, stone, or woven material depending on availability. In some regions, especially where timber is scarce, the earth itself is left exposed and compacted hard. This technique works surprisingly well. The pressure of surrounding soil locks the structure in place. A fringe tidbit worth noting is that some underground homes show signs of ritual placement, such as specific orientations or offerings placed in the floor before completion. While interpretations vary, it suggests that building was not purely practical. It carried symbolic weight. Creating a home inside the earth connected people to deeper beliefs about origin and belonging. You stand inside the imagined pit, now the air noticeably calmer. Sound changes. Even your own breathing feels louder. This enclosed space encourages quiet voices and slower movements. It is not claustrophobic so much as protective. There is debate among scholars about whether underground homes significantly reduced illness during winter by shielding inhabitants from harsh weather. Some argue reduced exposure lowered risk, while others point out that poor ventilation could create new problems. The truth likely varied by design quality and maintenance, which brings you to the next critical concern: air. But before ventilation there is roofing. You imagine logs or poles laid across the pit supported by a central post or beams. Over that brush grass and finally the saved earth. Layer by layer the roof becomes part of the landscape again. From above it looks like a mound. From below it feels solid and reassuring. You run your hand along an imaginary wall, feeling the cool firmness. This is not just a hole. It is a carefully shaped environment. A collaboration between human effort and natural material. Digging into the land transforms cold ground into the foundation of warmth. As you straighten up and look toward the center of this forming space, you sense the next concern emerging naturally. Fire, smoke, breathing. Because warmth is only useful if you can survive it. The story moves deeper still into how underground homes learn to breathe. You notice the warmth before you fully understand it. It is subtle, not the blast of heat from a modern vent, but a steady calm that seeps into your bones. The deeper you imagine yourself inside the earth, the more obvious it becomes that the ground itself is doing most of the work. Long before insulation had a name, people understood this through experience. Soil packed tightly resists sudden temperature change. What is freezing above becomes manageable below. There is solid archaeological evidence showing that underground homes maintained interior temperatures far more consistently than surface structures during winter. Even when nights plunged into brutal cold, the air below ground hovered at a level that could be made comfortable with minimal fire. You feel it now, the difference between surviving and resting. The earth is slow. It absorbs heat from bodies and flames and releases it just as slowly. That patience is its greatest gift. You run your hand along the packed wall again, imagining how it feels slightly cool but not biting. This balance matters. Too much heat dries the air and wastes fuel. Too little and fingers stiffen, sleep becomes shallow. Underground extremes soften. This is why families could survive long winters without burning through precious resources. Fire becomes a supplement, not a desperate necessity. An often overlooked detail is that many underground homes were partially lined with organic materials like grasses, reeds, or hides. These layers trapped pockets of air, boosting insulation even further. It sounds simple, but the trapped air acted like a thermal buffer. Modern insulation relies on the same principle, just with shinier packaging. You begin to appreciate how this changes daily rhythms. Fires do not need to roar all day. A small hearth carefully managed keeps the space comfortable. Smoke rises lazily instead of being ripped away by wind. The smell of burning wood lingers, mixing with the scent of earth and food. It becomes the smell of winter safety. There is still discussion among researchers about how much insulation came from soil alone versus added materials like sod and timber. Some reconstructions suggest the earth did most of the work, while others argue layered roofing was essential in colder regions. The debate continues because preservation is imperfect. Wood rots, grass disappears, the earth remains holding its secrets quietly. You imagine lying down to sleep, body heat slowly warming the space around you. One person adds warmth, but several together create a noticeable shift. This is where architecture and social life intertwine. Shared space means shared heat. It also means shared responsibility to maintain the balance. If the fire grows too hot, everyone feels it. If it dies, the chill returns. Cooperation is not optional. A lesser-known observation from excavated sites is the careful attention paid to floor levels. Floors were often slightly lower than the surrounding walls, creating a subtle bowl that trapped warmer air. Cold air, heavier, stayed closer to entrances. This passive design reduced drafts without a single moving part. You almost smile at the elegance of it. As you breathe slowly, you realize the silence is part of the insulation too. Thick earth muffles sound, turning storms into distant murmurs. That quiet allows deeper rest. In winter, rest is survival. Exhaustion leads to mistakes. Underground homes protect not just the body, but the mind. Some experts question whether this insulated calm made people less aware of dangerous weather shifts above. Others argue the opposite, that the stability below allowed clearer thinking and better planning. Without constant exposure to cold stress, decision-making improves. Again, the ground keeps its answer. You picture snow piling higher above the roof, adding yet another insulating layer. What seems threatening becomes helpful. The heavier the snow, the warmer it gets below. This inversion feels almost magical, but it is simply physics working in favor of those who paid attention. Your thoughts drift to how this knowledge was shared. No diagrams, no measurements, just demonstration and memory. A parent shows a child where to pack earth tighter, where to leave space for air. Over generations, these small adjustments accumulate into reliable design. You sit there quietly, warmth steady, breath slow. The earth holds you without asking for much in return. It is not dramatic, it is dependable. And as the night deepens outside, you realize insulation is only part of the story. Warmth also needs air. Without it, even the safest shelter can become dangerous. Your attention turns naturally toward the hearth, where fire flickers softly and smoke rises, searching for a way out. You shift your focus toward the center of the space where the fire lives. It is modest, controlled, never allowed to dominate. Fire underground is both friend and threat, and people learn this balance through careful practice. Long-standing evidence from excavated homes shows hearths placed with remarkable consistency. usually near the centre or slightly offset, never pressed against a wall. This placement matters more than it first appears. You watch the smoke rise in your imagination, curling upward in slow grey ribbons. It does not choke the room. Instead, it drifts toward an opening above a small vent that connects this warm pocket of life to the cold sky. Ventilation is the quiet genius of underground homes. Without it, warmth becomes deadly. With it, fire becomes manageable. Many pit houses and earth lodges featured a central smoke hole that doubled as a light source. During the day, sunlight spilled down into the space, creating a soft glow that moved with the hours. At night, the opening framed stars or swirling snow. One well-documented fact is that these openings were often adjusted seasonally, partially covered in extreme cold and widened when weather allowed. This fine-tuning kept air fresh without sacrificing heat. You notice how air behaves differently here. Warm air rises slowly, carrying smoke with it. Fresh air slips in through lower entrances or gaps almost unnoticed. This natural circulation keeps oxygen flowing without drafts. It is passive engineering learned by watching how smoke moves and how lungs respond. An unusual detail found in some sites is the presence of angled smoke shafts rather than straight openings. These channels reduce snow blockage and helped pull smoke out more efficiently. It is a clever solution that suggests experimentation and refinement over time. Not every group used it, but where it appears it works. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about how well these ventilation systems prevented long-term respiratory issues. Some argue soot build-up suggests challenges, while others point out that maintenance routines likely addressed this. Ash was regularly cleaned out, roof coverings were adjusted, the design was not static, it responded to experience. You imagine someone rising early, poking the embers back to life, adjusting the smoke hole, covering just enough to let yesterday's smoke escape. The smell shifts from stale to fresh. Small actions like this define daily life underground. They are quiet rituals repeated until they become instinct. The fire itself serves multiple roles. It heats stones used for cooking. It dries damp clothing. It provides light when the day fades early. Yet it is never allowed to rage. Fuel is precious. Controlled burning extends supplies through long winters. That restraint is learned, not assumed. A lesser-known observation is that some underground homes used heated stones placed strategically around the room to distribute warmth evenly. These stones warmed in the fire and then moved acted like primitive radiators. You can almost feel their gentle heat at your feet while the fire rests. You sit and listen to the crackle softened by earth walls. Smoke no longer stings your eyes. Instead, it carries comfort. The space feels alive but calm. This balance is the result of countless small adjustments made by generations who paid attention to consequences. There is debate about whether smoke holes also function symbolically, serving as a spiritual connection to the sky world above. Some traditions describe them as pathways for prayers. Others see them purely as practical features. Both interpretations can coexist without cancelling each other out. As you breathe easily, you realise ventilation is not an afterthought. It is as important as insulation. Without fresh air, warmth suffocates. With it, underground homes become sustainable environments rather than temporary refuges. Your gaze drifts toward the entrance, now low and narrow, designed to keep cold air out and warmth in. It reminds you that this space is not meant for standing tall. It encourages sitting, lying down, gathering close. The architecture shapes behaviour as much as it shapes climate. You feel settled, protected but aware. Fire flickers. Air moves gently. Earth surrounds you. And within this balance, life continues through the harshest nights. As your thoughts slow, you sense how this shelter is not meant for one person alone. It thrives when shared. The warmth you feel is multiplied by presence, by voices, by bodies close together. That shared warmth is the next layer of survival waiting to be explored. You become aware of how close everyone is. Not crowded in an uncomfortable way, but near enough that warmth feels collective. Underground homes work best this way. Bodies generate heat, and when people gather, that warmth accumulates. Well-established anthropological findings show that shared living spaces significantly improved winter survival rates in cold regions. Heat is social here. You feel it in the way shoulders brush and blankets overlap. The space encourages togetherness. There are no distant rooms, no long corridors. Everyone hears the same sound, smells the same fire, breathes the same air. This closeness changes how people interact. Voices soften. Movements become considerate. In winter, privacy yields to survival, and the design supports that shift naturally. You imagine families settling into routines. Elders claim spots near the warmest areas. Children curl up closer to walls or beneath shared coverings. The fire is always within reach. This arrangement is not random. Over time, people learn where heat lingers longest and where drafts sneak in. The interior becomes a map of comfort. A small but fascinating detail uncovered in some excavations is the presence of shallow floor grooves that may have guided sleeping mats into consistent positions. These grooves suggest intentional organization, not chaos. Even underground order matters. Knowing where to sleep can mean the difference between warmth and restless cold. There is still no complete agreement among researchers about whether communal living was primarily a response to cold or a reflection of existing social structures. Some argue that extended families already lived together and architecture followed. Others suggest winter conditions forced closer quarters temporarily. The evidence supports both perspectives depending on region. You listen to the sounds of shared life. Quiet conversation. The soft thud of wood being added to the fire. The occasional laugh that echoes briefly before being absorbed by earth. Sound does not travel far here. It stays close, reinforcing connection. You realize that underground homes also simplify resource management. One fire instead of many. One cooking area. Shared food stores. This efficiency reduces labor and conserves fuel. It also requires trust. Everyone depends on everyone else to respect limits. Taking too much food or burning too much wood affects the whole group. An unexpected observation from some sites is the way sleeping areas were sometimes slightly elevated using platforms of packed earth or wood. This lifted sleepers above colder air that settled near the floor. It is a subtle design choice, but it shows attention to comfort within constraints. You notice how children learn in this environment. Stories are told within earshot. Skills are demonstrated up close. Knowledge transfer happens naturally because separation is impossible. Winter becomes a classroom. The architecture supports education as much as shelter. Some scholars question whether such close quarters increased conflict or stress. Others counter that strong cultural norms and shared purpose mitigated tension. Living underground likely intensified both harmony and disagreement, but survival demanded cooperation. There was little room for prolonged conflict when warmth and air were shared. You feel the steady rhythm of communal life slow your thoughts. The fire crackles softly. Breathing sinks. The outside world feels distant, almost irrelevant. Inside, time stretches differently. Days blend into each other, marked more by meals and stories than by sunlight. This closeness also provides protection. If someone falls ill or struggles, others notice quickly. Care happens immediately. Underground homes create constant awareness of one another. Isolation is rare for better or worse. As you settle into this shared warmth, you sense another rhythm layered beneath it. The seasons. These homes are not year-round prisons. They are seasonal answers. As winter deepens, people descend. As warmth returns, they rise again. The movement itself is part of the design. You imagine preparations for that descent, families timing their move underground carefully. Too early and resources are wasted. Too late and cold steals energy. Seasonal rhythm governs everything. Underground homes are the anchor point of that rhythm. You breathe deeply, feeling held by earth and community alike. The warmth you feel is not just thermal, it is human. And as winter stretches on above you, understand how going underground is not an act of isolation, but one of connection. Soon the seasons will shift again, and with them the way people move through space. That movement carries you forward deeper into the cycle of life shaped by winter. You begin to notice how time behaves differently underground. Without wide windows or shifting light, the day feels softer, less urgent. This is not accidental. Seasonal descent into these homes reshapes daily rhythms, encouraging slower movement and longer periods of rest. Archaeological records consistently indicate that winter dwellings were used primarily during the coldest months, with families returning to surface shelters when conditions eased. Underground living is part of a cycle, not a permanent retreat. You imagine late autumn when the air sharpens and frost appears more often than dew. That is when preparation intensifies. Tools are repaired, roof supports are checked, stored foods are counted carefully. The decision to move underground is deliberate. Too early and you risk dampness and boredom. Too late and cold drains energy fast. Timing matters. As you picture the seasonal shift, you realize it is communal. Entire groups descend together. There is a sense of ceremony to it, even if unspoken. People carry familiar objects down with them: cooking tools, bedding, small personal items. The underground home is not a bunker. It is a continuation of life, just repositioned. One little known but well-attested practice involves leaving surface shelters standing during winter rather than dismantling them. These structures waited patiently above, ready for return in spring. This choice reduced labour and reinforced the idea that underground homes were seasonal partners, not replacements. The landscape itself became layered with use. You feel the contrast between above and below more strongly now. Above ground, sound carries far. Below it settles quickly. Above wind dictates movement. Below space shapes behaviour. These differences influence mood. Underground people speak more softly, listen more closely. Silence becomes normal rather than uncomfortable. There is lingering disagreement about whether this seasonal confinement increased introspection or simply reflected it. Some researchers suggest winter underground life fostered storytelling, ritual, and teaching. Others argue these traditions already existed and simply became more visible in close quarters. The evidence allows for both interpretations, and perhaps the truth shifts depending on the group. You imagine evenings spent close together, shadows flickering across packed walls. Stories stretch longer than they might in summer. Without the pressure of constant movement, memory has room to breathe. Oral history thrives here, passed gently from voice to ear. An unexpected detail uncovered at several sites is the careful maintenance of entrances during winter. Snow was not always cleared away completely. Instead, it was shaped to form windbreaks, guiding airflow away from openings. This use of snow as a structural aid shows remarkable adaptability. What threatens above becomes useful below. You sense how underground homes teach patience. Fires are tended slowly. Meals are prepared thoughtfully. Rushing wastes energy and fuel. Winter rewards those who move deliberately. The architecture reinforces that lesson by limiting space and encouraging stillness. Children adapt quickly to this rhythm. Play becomes quieter, more imaginative. Objects are repurposed. Stories turn into games. Learning happens constantly because everyone is within reach. Underground homes compress not just space but experience. Some experts continue to question whether seasonal underground living limited trade and communication between groups. Others counter that winter travel was always limited regardless of housing. What mattered was preparation and connection before descent. Social networks were maintained through memory and expectation, not constant contact. You picture the moment of first snowfall after moving underground. Above, the world changes rapidly. Below, little shifts. That stability is comforting. It allows focus to turn inward toward relationships and routine, rather than constant reaction to weather. As days shorten, the underground space becomes a world unto itself. The entrance is the only reminder of what lies beyond. Each time someone emerges to fetch water or check conditions, they return with news. Wind stronger, snow deeper, cold sharper. The group listens, adjusts, continues. You feel how this seasonal descent is not an act of fear, but of trust. Trust in the land. Trust in shared knowledge. Trust that spring will return. Underground homes are built on that faith, reinforced every year when families rise again into sunlight. Your breathing slows as you imagine settling into this rhythm. The world narrows, but it does not shrink. It becomes manageable. And as winter stretches on, the underground home proves itself not just as shelter, but as a teacher shaping how people endure together. The next thought naturally follows. These designs didn't appear everywhere in the same way. Land climate and culture shape them differently. Your journey moves outward now across regions to see how underground living adapted to place. You begin to travel without moving, drifting across vast distances while staying grounded in the same idea. Underground living changes shape as the land itself changes. What works in open plains adapts differently in forests or high plateaus. Careful analysis of regional sites makes one thing clear. These homes are not copies of a single design. They are conversations with local environments. In colder grassland regions, winter winds have nothing to slow them. You feel that exposure immediately. Here, underground homes tend to sink deeper, using the earth as the primary shield. Roofs are heavier, layered thickly with soil and sod. The goal is simple and urgent. Block wind, hold heat. This approach shows up repeatedly in excavated plain settlements where depth correlates closely with winter severity. As you shift your attention westward into wooded areas, the design softens. Timber is more available. Underground spaces become shallower, combined with sturdy wooden frameworks above. Earth still insulates, but wood contributes structure and flexibility. This blending creates hybrid homes that sit halfway between surface and subterranean living. One quietly remarkable detail observed in forest regions is the reuse of fallen trees rather than cutting live ones. This choice suggests an ethic of efficiency and respect, but also practicality. Fallen timber was already seasoned and easier to work. It reduced labour and preserved resources during preparation for winter. You notice how entrances change too. In open land, entrances are often longer and angled, creating cold traps that prevent frigid air from rushing inside. In sheltered forests, entrances shorten, relying on surrounding trees as wind buffers. Every design choice reflects close attention to microclimate. There remains active disagreement among specialists about whether these regional variations represent independent innovation or cultural exchange between neighbouring groups. Some point to shared structural features as evidence of idea transmission. Others argue that similar problems naturally produce similar solutions. The soil, once again, does not clarify its intentions. You imagine standing above one of these homes just after snowfall. In some regions, only a faint mound gives it away. In others, the roof line is more obvious, rising slightly above ground. Visibility depends on strategy as much as environment. In areas prone to conflict, subtlety matters. In more isolated regions, durability takes priority. An intriguing but less discussed observation involves drainage. In wetter regions, shallow trenches sometimes guided meltwater away from entrances. These channels prevented flooding without complex engineering. They relied entirely on gravity and careful placement. Small decisions like this often determined whether a home remained livable through late winter thaw. You feel the importance of local knowledge here. Builders understood slope runoff, prevailing wind and snow behaviour. This was not generalised wisdom. It was specific, earned through repeated winters in the same place. Underground homes became maps of experience etched into the land. Children growing up in these regions absorbed that knowledge early. They learned where snow piled deepest, where ground stayed dry, where cold settled hardest. By adulthood, these lessons were instinctive. Building was not an abstract task, it was a remembered one. Some researchers question whether regional designs limited mobility by tying groups too closely to specific environments. Others argue the opposite, that understanding multiple landscapes allowed seasonal movement between zones. Evidence suggests many groups balance both adapting underground designs as they travelled. You pause and take in the variety. There is no single underground home. There are many answers to the same question shaped by wind, soil, water, and memory. Each one reflects careful listening to the land. As your thoughts settle, you realise this diversity is not fragmentation. It is resilience. When one method fails, another exists elsewhere. Knowledge spreads slowly, selectively, blending with tradition rather than replacing it. You feel the calm that comes from understanding this adaptability. Underground homes are not frozen in time. They shift, evolve, respond. And as winter tightens its grip in different corners of the continent, people descend into spaces shaped precisely for where they stand. Your journey continues, narrowing again from broad landscapes to specific communities. Some places refine underground living into something monumental. Massive, enduring structures that house not just families but entire ways of life. You drift toward those places now where depth and design reach their fullest expression. You slow your pace again, drawn back from wide landscapes into the quiet focus of human hands at work. Everything you have imagined so far depends on tools and patience. Without either, underground homes remain ideas instead of shelters. You picture the tools laid out near a digging site, simple in form but deeply familiar to those who use them. Bone blades smoothed by years of handling, stone edges sharpened carefully, wooden digging sticks worn dark where palms grip them daily. Material evidence from numerous sites confirms that digging tools were often made from locally available animal bones, especially large shoulder blades that match the curve of soil scooping perfectly. This was not improvisation. It was refinement. People selected shapes that worked with the body rather than against it. Digging became rhythmic rather than brutal. You imagine the physical effort involved. Earth doesn't yield quickly, especially when preparing for winter under time pressure. But the work is spread out. One person loosens soil, another lifts it away. Children carry lighter loads. Elders observe and advise. Progress is slow but steady. There is no expectation of finishing in a day. These homes are built with the understanding that endurance matters more than speed. An interesting but rarely mentioned detail is how dig sites were sometimes rested between work sessions. Letting soil dry or settle made later shaping easier and reduced collapse risk. This pause required confidence and experience. Rushing only created more work later. There remains disagreement among analysts about whether specialized diggers existed within these communities or whether everyone shared the skill equally. Some suggest certain individuals developed reputations for reading soil well. Others believe the knowledge was widely distributed to ensure resilience. What seems clear is that digging skill was respected. You feel the patience required begin to slow your own breathing. There is something meditative about repetitive labour when the goal is shelter rather than speed. Each scoop of soil is an investment in future warmth. That perspective changes how effort feels. As pits deepen, tools change roles. Larger implements give way to finer shaping tools. Walls are smoothed by hand. Edges are rounded to prevent crumbling. Floors are tamped hard, sometimes sprinkled with water to compact them further. This attention to detail matters. Small imperfections can become drafts or leaks later. A subtle but clever practice uncovered in some regions involves testing soil stability by pressing or tapping walls and listening to the sound. Hollow responses indicated weak spots that needed reinforcement. This auditory assessment required no instruments, only experience and patience. You imagine conversations happening during this work. Stories, advice, quiet encouragement. Digging becomes social time, reinforcing bonds while accomplishing a necessary task. In winter, preparation work and connection are rarely separate. Some researchers raise questions about how communities balance digging labour with other seasonal demands like hunting and food processing. Others point out that underground construction was staggered over time, often begun well before winter arrived. Preparation was layered, not frantic. You notice how the tools themselves carry memory. A digging blade repaired multiple times tells a story of previous winters. A handle shaped to a familiar grip feels like an extension of the body. These objects are not disposable, they are companions. As the pit nears completion, the pace shifts again. Less soil is removed. More attention is given to symmetry and smoothness. You can almost feel hands brushing walls, checking for weak spots. The earth responds slowly, holding its shape when treated with respect. You pause and take in the scene, tools resting against the edge, a partially completed space below, breath visible in cold air. The sense of purpose is calm, not frantic. Winter is coming, but panic has no place here. Preparation replaces fear. There is also a humility in this process. People accept the limits of their tools and bodies. They work with the land rather than forcing it. That humility is part of why these homes last. As you step back mentally, you realize that digging is not just physical labor, it is a way of thinking. It teaches patience, observation, and respect for material limits. Those lessons shape the homes as much as the soil itself. Your thoughts drift toward what comes next. Once the earth is shaped, knowledge must guide structure. Where to place supports, how to span space safely. The tools fall quiet, but thinking does not. Design emerges without drawings, guided by memory and shared understanding. You feel that transition beginning now from effort to intention, as the underground space waits to be completed. You sense a quiet confidence settle over the work now. The digging is done, the space exists. What comes next is not measured with rulers or drawn on hides. It lives in memory, gesture, and shared understanding. Design here is not abstract. It is remembered winter after winter, corrected by experience rather than theory. You imagine someone standing at the edge of the pit, scanning it with their eyes already seeing the finished space. Where the central support will stand, how the roof poles will fan outward, which side should hold the entrance so drifting snow will not choke it. These decisions are quick because they have been made many times before, even if never written down. Archaeological patterns show remarkable consistency and structural layouts across generations within the same region. Posts appear in similar positions. Entrances repeat familiar angles. Hearths settle into predictable locations. This consistency tells you that knowledge moved reliably from one winter to the next without formal plans. Memory was enough. You notice how hands guide this process. A finger traces a line in the soil to indicate where a beam will rest. A nod confirms agreement. Words are minimal. Everyone involved understands the goal. The absence of blueprints does not mean the absence of precision. There is a small but fascinating observation made at several sites where post holes were deliberately oversized, then packed tightly once beams were placed. This allowed for slight adjustments before final commitment. Flexibility was built into the process. Nothing was locked in too early. You feel the weight of responsibility in these choices. A misplaced support can cause collapse months later when repair is far more dangerous. This awareness sharpens attention. Builders rely on lessons learned the hard way in past winters. The ground remembers failures even if people prefer not to. Some researchers remain uncertain whether design authority rested with specific individuals or emerged through group consensus. Evidence suggests both possibilities. In some communities, elders likely guided decisions. In others, shared experience may have leveled authority. What matters is that the result worked. You imagine roof beams being tested before placement pressed downward by multiple hands to feel for weakness. Timber is chosen carefully, often slightly green, so it can flex under weight rather than snap. That choice reveals a sophisticated understanding of material behavior gained through observation. As the roof structure takes shape, the space below darkens slightly. You feel enclosed but not trapped. This is intentional. Lower ceilings reduce air volume, making it easier to warm. Every design choice serves multiple purposes. Nothing is purely aesthetic. A quiet detail that rarely gets attention is the way entrances were sometimes offset rather than centered. This prevented direct wind flow and also created a subtle visual barrier from inside. Cold and danger do not enter easily when paths are indirect. You imagine the roof layers returning now: brush, grass, soil, each layer placed deliberately pressed down by feet and hands. The mound above grows heavier, but below the space becomes safer. The earth presses inward, locking everything together. There is ongoing uncertainty among modern analysts about how much freedom builders allow themselves to innovate within traditional designs. Some sites show clear experimentation. Others adhere rigidly to known forms. It is possible that innovation increased after particularly harsh winters when survival demanded improvement. You step inside the finished space in your mind. The walls curve gently. The roof feels close but secure. You can sense where heat will collect and where shadows will linger. This understanding comes not from theory, but from lived experience passed down quietly. You realize that building without blueprints requires trust. Trust in memory, trust in elders, trust in the land itself. This trust reduces anxiety. There is no endless revision, no second guessing. Once built, the home is accepted as it is and maintained carefully. As your thoughts settle, you feel admiration rather than nostalgia. This is not lost wisdom. It is practical intelligence shaped by necessity. And as winter presses harder above these designs, prove themselves again night after night, your attention drifts outward once more. If design changes by region, it also changes by lifestyle. Some groups refine underground homes into massive communal structures, especially where the land allows it. You feel drawn toward those places now where earth and timber combine on a grand scale to shelter entire communities through the coldest months. You feel the scale shift as you move forward in thought. Underground living is no longer just about individual families or small groups. In some regions, it grows into something larger, more ambitious. Entire communities gather beneath broad roofs weighted with earth. The land allows it, and so people respond. Across the northern plains and river valleys, physical remains show repeated use of large subterranean structures capable of housing many families at once. These were not emergency shelters. They were seasonal centers of life. Their size alone suggests planning far beyond short-term survival. They were meant to hold stories, tools, ceremonies, and warmth together. You imagine approaching one of these structures in winter. From a distance, it looks like a low rise in the snow, perhaps mistaken for a natural feature. Up close, you notice the entrance often extended outward like a short tunnel. This design prevents cold air from rushing inside and gives time for warmth to adjust. The threshold matters. Crossing it feels intentional. Inside, the space opens dramatically. Thick wooden posts rise from the floor, supporting heavy beams overhead. The roof is alive with layers of grass and soil. It presses down firmly, reminding you that the earth itself is part of the structure. The weight above increases stability rather than threatening it. One surprising detail noted by excavators is the reuse of central support posts across multiple seasons. When roofs were repaired or rebuilt, posts were sometimes left standing, gradually becoming smoothed and darkened by years of contact. These posts anchored not just architecture but memory. You sense how life unfolds here. Cooking areas spaced carefully to avoid crowding, sleeping zones arranged by family groups, shared storage tucked into cooler corners. The space encourages cooperation simply by existing. There is no way to live here without awareness of others. There is still uncertainty about how leadership functioned within these large underground homes. Some interpretations suggest specific families held responsibility for maintenance. Others point toward rotating duties shared among residents. The material record allows multiple readings, and oral traditions add layers rather than answers. You notice how sound behaves again. Many voices do not create chaos. Instead, earth absorbs echoes. Conversation becomes a low hum rather than a roar. This acoustic softness likely reduced stress during long confinement. The environment shapes emotional tone. Another understated observation involves floor maintenance. In several large structures, floors were periodically resurfaced with fresh layers of compacted earth. This practice reduced dust and moisture while keeping the surface smooth. It also marked time, each layer representing another winter endured. You imagine children growing up here surrounded by constant activity. Learning happens by proximity. Skills are visible. Knowledge is not hidden. Winter becomes a season of observation and absorption rather than stagnation. Some modern thinkers question whether such large shared spaces increased vulnerability to disease or conflict. Others argue the opposite, noting that shared warmth and constant awareness allowed quick response to problems. The truth likely shifted depending on population size and season length. You feel the sense of security these structures provide. Snow can pile high. Wind can scream across the plains. Inside, the rhythm remains steady. Fires burn. Food is shared. Time slows. These large underground homes also serve as cultural anchors. Ceremonies held here carry extra weight. Being surrounded by earth reinforces connection to origin stories and shared identity. Shelter and belief overlap naturally. You step back mentally, seeing how underground living expands to meet social needs as much as environmental ones. Architecture becomes a reflection of community size and structure. The land supports it, and people respond with confidence. As your thoughts drift onward, you realize that not all underground homes aim for grandeur. Some regions refine the form differently, responding to colder extremes with depth rather than width. You feel yourself drawn toward those harsher landscapes now, where winters demand even greater ingenuity, and where underground living reaches another level of refinement. You step into a colder world now, where winter does not flirt with discomfort but commits fully. The plains stretch wide and exposed, and the cold has nowhere to settle except into your bones. In these regions, underground living becomes deeper, heavier, and more deliberate. The land offers little shelter above, so people take refuge below. Evidence from long-occupied plains villages shows that earth lodges here were dug significantly deeper than in milder regions. Depth mattered. The lower you went, the less the temperature shifted between day and night. That stability meant fewer fires, less fuel, and more reliable sleep. You feel the calm that comes from predictability, even when the world above is brutal. You imagine standing inside one of these lodges as wind roars overhead. Thick central posts rise like trees made of patience, holding massive beams that support a roof layered with sod and soil. The structure feels ancient and solid, built to endure not just one winter but many. One quietly remarkable feature found in some plains lodges is the careful shaping of the interior ceiling into a shallow dome rather than a flat span. This shape helped distribute weight evenly and reduce the risk of collapse under heavy snow. It also encouraged smoke to drift naturally toward the opening above the hearth. You sense how every choice here responds to scarcity. Trees are not plentiful. Timber must be used efficiently. Each beam is placed where it will do the most work. Nothing decorative survives unless it serves a purpose. Beauty comes from function, not ornament. There is disagreement about how these deep lodges affected mobility. Some scholars believe they encouraged longer stays in one place, fostering agriculture and trade. Others suggest seasonal movement continued, with lodges serving as winter anchors rather than permanent homes. Both interpretations fit different sites, and the land itself does not argue back. You picture families returning to the same lodge year after year. Repairs are made, roof layers are refreshed, smoke darkens beams further. The lodge becomes familiar in a way surface shelters rarely achieve. It feels less like a structure and more like a living companion. A lesser discussed observation is how entrances in plains lodges were often oriented away from prevailing winds, sometimes twisting slightly rather than forming straight tunnels. This subtle curve slowed cold air and prevented snow from being driven directly inside. You can almost feel the stillness just beyond the entrance compared to the fury outside. You imagine daily life unfolding here. Food preparation near the fire, tool repair along the walls, storytelling filling long nights. The lodge holds warmth, sound and memory together. Winter feels contained rather than overwhelming. Some analysts question whether living so deeply underground increased risk during floods or sudden thaws. Others counter that builders chose elevated ground, carefully avoiding low-lying areas prone to water accumulation. The placement of lodges suggests careful landscape reading rather than reckless digging. You breathe slowly, feeling the heavy quiet settle around you. Outside, winter dominates. Inside, it is acknowledged but not feared. The lodge does not fight the cold, it sidesteps it. You realize that these plain structures represent a peak in underground winter adaptation. They combine depth insulation, communal living, and precise orientation into a system that works reliably year after year. This is not improvisation. It is confidence born from survival. As your thoughts drift, you feel drawn toward one group in particular known for refining Earth Lodge design into something both practical and symbolic. Their homes stand as some of the most studied examples of underground winter living. You move toward them now, ready to step inside a lodge that history remembers well. You step fully into the world of the Mandan now, where underground living reaches a kind of balance that feels both practical and intentional. The air inside their earth lodges carries a sense of order. Nothing feels improvised. These homes are large, carefully proportioned, and meant to last through many winters. You feel it immediately, the confidence in their construction. The Mandan lived along the Missouri River, a place where winters could be long and unforgiving. Excavated village sites show rows of circular earth lodges arranged with care, each one dug into the ground and reinforced with heavy timber. These lodges often reached 40 feet across, large enough to shelter extended families and store significant food supplies. Their size alone tells you they were not temporary refuges, but central pillars of life. You imagine standing beneath a roof supported by 4 massive central posts. These posts rise from the floor like silent guardians holding a lattice of beams above. Over that framework, layers of willow branches, grass, and thick earth create a roof so heavy it feels immovable. Snow piling on top only adds to its strength. You sense how secure this must have felt during blizzards, when the world outside disappeared completely. One small but striking detail emerges as you look closer. The central posts were sometimes carved or marked, subtly distinguished from ordinary beams. These markings were not decorative in a modern sense. They reflected respect for the structure itself, acknowledging the importance of what held the roof, and by extension, life together. Inside, the layout feels intentional. The hearth sits at the centre, directly beneath the smoke hole. Sleeping areas ring the outer walls. Storage pits tuck neatly into cooler corners of the lodge. This arrangement appears again and again across Mandan sites, suggesting a shared understanding of how space should flow. Comfort and efficiency are not accidental here. There is some uncertainty about how rigidly this layout was enforced. Some lodges show slight variations, perhaps reflecting family preference or adaptation over time. Whether these differences signal personal choice or changing needs remains open to interpretation, and the lodges themselves offer quiet hints rather than answers. You imagine daily life unfolding here in winter. Women tending fires and preparing food. Men repairing tools or crafting items by firelight. Children listening, watching, absorbing. The lodge feels alive but not chaotic. Its circular shape encourages movement without corners, conversation without distance. An interesting observation from early European accounts describes these lodges as surprisingly warm and dry even during extreme cold. Visitors unfamiliar with underground living often express disbelief at the comfort found inside. That reaction says as much about the observers as it does about the builders. You notice how the entrance passage slopes downward before rising slightly into the lodge. This design traps cold air away from the main living space. It also creates a psychological transition. Entering the lodge feels like leaving winter behind, even if only temporarily. Some modern analysts question whether the scale of Mandan earth lodges reflects agricultural stability rather than purely climatic adaptation. The Mandan were skilled farmers, and their food surplus may have supported larger, more permanent structures. Others point out that without reliable winter shelter, such agriculture would have been impossible. Cause and effect intertwine here, hard to separate cleanly. You sit quietly in the imagined space, listening to the muted sounds of life. Earth walls absorb sharp noises. Firelight softens faces. The lodge feels less like a building and more like a shared organism breathing slowly with its inhabitants. You realise that these homes also carry symbolic weight. Being partially underground connects people to the earth in a literal way. Creation stories often speak of emergence from the ground. Living this close to soil reinforces those beliefs daily without words. As the night deepens outside, the Mandan lodge holds steady. Wind presses against earth and timber, but nothing shifts. You feel the reassurance of something tested and proven. This is not innovation for its own sake. It is refinement born from generations of observation. Your thoughts drift gently forward. The Mandan are not alone in mastering underground winter living. Other groups shape similar ideas differently, guided by their own landscapes and traditions. You feel yourself preparing to move again, leaving this lodge slowly carrying its warmth and structure with you as the story continues deeper into everyday life below ground. You settle into the rhythm of life below ground, where days are measured less by sunlight and more by routine. Inside these underground homes, daily life unfolds with a quiet predictability that feels calming rather than confining. The space encourages it. With fewer distractions from weather and movement, attention turns inward toward tasks that sustain both body and spirit. Cooking anchors much of the day. You imagine the steady preparation of meals near the hearth, the smell of simmering food blending with smoke and earth. Pots hang or rest on heated stones. Ingredients are simple but carefully managed. Stored grains, dried meat, preserved roots. The underground environment keeps food cool and protected, reducing spoilage during long winters. This practical advantage is one reason such homes supported stable winter living across many regions. You notice how movement inside the home is economical. Nothing is far away. Tools are kept within reach. Work happens seated or kneeling rather than standing. This conserves energy, an important consideration when calories are precious. The architecture quietly teaches efficiency. A detail that often escapes notice is how light is managed. During the day, sunlight filtering through the smoke hole shifts slowly across the floor, marking time gently. At night, firelight takes over, casting soft shadows that never quite reach the walls. This limited lighting encourages slower evenings, longer conversations, and earlier rest. You imagine storytelling filling those hours. Voices carry easily, but do not echo harshly. Children listen while hands stay busy with small tasks, repairing clothing, sharpening tools, braiding fibers. Knowledge passes naturally in this shared space, absorbed rather than instructed. Some observers question whether such enclosed living dulled awareness of the outside world. Others suggest the opposite, that spending time sheltered sharpened observation when people did venture out. Each trip outside mattered. Weather signs were read carefully. Snow texture, wind direction, cloud movement. Underground living made every external interaction intentional. You notice how cleanliness is maintained. Ash is swept regularly. Food scraps are removed promptly to deter pests. Floors are kept smooth. This care is not about comfort alone. It is about health. Living close together demands attention to small details. A lesser-known practice involves the occasional repositioning of interior items to manage airflow and heat distribution. Sleeping mats might be moved slightly as winter deepened. Storage shifted away from damp areas. These adjustments reflect constant awareness rather than fixed habits. You feel how sound becomes part of comfort. The fire crackles softly. Tools make muted taps. Laughter rises and falls gently. Outside, storms rage unheard. This contrast creates a sense of safety that allows minds to relax. Anxiety eases when threats are distant. Some modern analysts debate whether underground life-limited creativity by restricting space. Yet the evidence of intricate crafts produced during winter suggests the opposite. With fewer demands on movement, hands and minds were free to focus. Winter becomes a season of making rather than merely enduring. You imagine children growing accustomed to this environment, finding games in shadows and stories in ceiling beams. Their understanding of home is shaped by earth and fire rather than walls and windows. This familiarity carries forward, influencing how they build when it becomes their turn. As hours pass quietly, you sense how underground living creates continuity. Days blur gently into each other, but meaning does not fade. Instead, it deepens. Repetition becomes reassurance. The home holds routine together like packed soil holds heat. Eventually your thoughts drift toward the people who keep this system functioning so smoothly. The labor behind daily comfort is not evenly distributed. Certain roles emerge naturally, shaped by experience and tradition. You begin to notice how responsibility and knowledge settle into particular hands, especially those often overlooked when discussing architecture. The story moves gently toward them now, toward the people who anchor these underground homes through care and continuity. You start to notice patterns in who moves first each morning and who stays closest to the heart of the home. Underground living reveals roles quietly without announcements. In many communities, women become the steady anchors of these spaces. Their knowledge shapes not only daily routine but the very structure of the home itself. Material traces from multiple regions indicate that women were often responsible for maintaining earth lodges and pit houses, from repairing roofs to managing interior organization. This was not incidental labor. It required deep understanding of how soil behaved, how moisture moved, how heat settled. These homes survived winter after winter, largely because someone paid close attention to small changes and acted early. You imagine a woman pressing her palm against a wall, sensing dampness before it becomes a problem. She adjusts airflow, adds fresh earth where insulation has thinned. Small acts repeated quietly prevent larger failures. This attention is learned over years, passed down through demonstration rather than instruction. An overlooked but telling detail appears in the wear patterns of interior spaces. Areas associated with food preparation and storage show consistent reshaping and reinforcement. These zones were not static. They evolved as needs changed, reflecting ongoing stewardship rather than fixed design. You sense how responsibility creates authority. Decisions about when to repair, when to adjust, when to rebuild often rested with those most familiar with the space. Leadership here is practical rather than ceremonial. It is earned through care. There remains uncertainty about how universally this pattern applied. Some groups may have divided responsibilities differently or shared them more evenly. Yet the consistency across many sites suggests a widespread understanding that those who managed daily life were best positioned to manage the home itself. You imagine winter evenings where this knowledge is quietly passed on. A child watches how hands pack soil just so, how grass is layered to shed moisture, how a draft is felt before it is seen. These lessons do not feel like lessons, they feel like living. You notice how this stewardship extends beyond physical maintenance. Managing food stores, regulating fire use, coordinating shared space. All of it contributes to survival. Architecture and care are inseparable here. A subtle but meaningful observation comes from storage pits often located within easy reach of work areas. Their placement suggests intentional planning to reduce strain and conserve energy, especially during pregnancy or injury. The home adapts to the bodies within it. Some modern interpretations struggle to categorize this labor because it does not fit neatly into familiar hierarchies, yet without it underground homes would fail. The structure holds because someone holds the structure together. You feel the quiet strength in this role. It does not seek attention, it seeks continuity. Winter rewards that mindset. The home becomes an extension of care itself. As the night deepens and firelight flickers, you sense how stability is created not by dramatic acts but by constant attention. The underground home survives because someone notices what others overlook. Your thoughts drift gently onward toward the youngest inhabitants of these spaces. Children grow up shaped by earth walls and firelight. Their understanding of warmth and safety formed early. Their experience of underground life leaves marks that last long after winter ends. You follow that thought, now moving softly into the world seen from closer to the floor where curiosity and learning unfold side by side. You lower yourself closer to the floor now because that is where the world looks different. From a child's height, the underground home feels vast and intimate at the same time. The ceiling looms gently overhead, not threatening but enclosing like a protective palm. Firelight flickers across packed earth walls, turning shadows into moving shapes that invite imagination rather than fear. Children raised in these spaces grow up with a very particular sense of safety. Long-term settlement evidence from winter villages shows that underground homes were occupied consistently across many generations, meaning childhood unfolded here again and again. This was not a rare experience. It was normal life. Warmth came from the ground. Light came from fire and sky above the smoke hole. Storms existed mostly as sounds. You imagine a child lying on a sleeping mat watching sparks rise and disappear. Questions form early. Where does the smoke go? Why does the roof hold? Why is it warmer near the wall at night? Learning begins with observation, not instruction. Curiosity is rewarded because everything happens close enough to see. Games take shape in limited space. Small objects become toys. Bones, pebbles, bits of wood. Children invent stories that match the environment. Underground worlds. Animals that burrow. Spirits that live beneath the soil. The architecture feeds imagination quietly. An unexpected detail found in some homes is the presence of small niches carved into walls at low height. These may have held personal items, tools, or simple decorations. Their placement suggests they were accessible to children, allowing them ownership of small parts of shared space. Even underground identity matters. You sense how children learn boundaries early. Fire is near, always visible. It demands respect. Elders demonstrate how to move around it, how to add fuel safely, how to sit without blocking airflow. These lessons are not dramatic. They are repeated calmly until they become instinct. Some researchers have questioned whether growing up underground limited exposure to daylight during winter months. Others note that winter daylight is scarce regardless of housing, and underground homes simply reduce unnecessary exposure to cold. Children still go outside. They still feel snow, wind and sun when it appears. The difference is that exposure is chosen, not forced. You imagine a child accompanying an adult outside on a cold morning. The contrast is sharp. Wind cuts, snow dazzles. Returning underground feels like relief. That contrast teaches appreciation. Warmth is not assumed. It is understood. Education happens through proximity. Toolmaking is watched closely. Food preparation observed repeatedly. Stories heard many times, each telling revealing new details. Underground homes compress learning into shared time. There is no separate classroom. Life itself teaches. A lesser-known observation comes from wear marks near entrances and ladders. These marks are often lower than expected, suggesting frequent use by smaller bodies. Children moved in and out regularly, helping with tasks suited to their size. Participation builds confidence early. You feel how discipline works here. Space is limited, noise travels, cooperation is necessary. Children learn quickly how their actions affect others. Throwing something carelessly, blocking airflow, disturbing the fire. Consequences are immediate and communal, not abstract. There remains uncertainty about how underground winter living shaped long-term emotional development. Some argue the closeness fostered strong social bonds. Others suggest it may have limited personal space. The truth likely varied by family temperament and season length. What remains clear is that children adapted because adaptation was modelled constantly. You imagine lullabies sung softly near the fire, rhythms slow, breath matches breath. Sleep comes easier when cold is held at bay. Dreams form in warm darkness filled with earth and flame rather than wind and hunger. As children grow, their understanding of the home deepens. They learn which walls stay driest, which spots feel warmest at dawn, which sounds mean weather is changing above. By adolescence, they read the space intuitively. The underground home becomes part of their body knowledge. You notice how leaving the home in spring feels momentous. Light floods in, space expands suddenly. Yet the underground lodge remains present in memory. It becomes the place associated with safety, storytelling, and learning. Even when living above ground again, that sense of enclosure stays inside. Some adults later choose to build their own underground homes nearby, repeating patterns learned in childhood. Others adapt designs, slightly adjusting to new conditions. Either way, the memory of being held by Earth informs their choices. You sit quietly with this thought. Childhood here is not defined by confinement, but by consistency. Winter does not interrupt growth. It reshapes it. The underground home provides a stable backdrop against which curiosity can unfold without fear. As your breathing slows, you realize that these early experiences do more than teach survival. They shape belief. Living inside the earth carries meaning beyond comfort. It connects children to stories about where people come from and where they belong. That connection grows stronger over time, threading through ritual and spirituality in ways that are subtle but enduring. Your attention drifts toward that deeper layer now where shelter and belief quietly intertwine. You begin to feel that the underground home is more than a clever response to cold. It carries meaning that settles slowly like warmth seeping through soil. Living this close to the earth changes how you think about beginnings, endings, and your place in between. The walls are not just walls, they are reminders. Many Native American traditions describe humanity emerging from the earth itself. This idea appears across different regions and languages, carried through stories rather than stone. When you live inside the ground each winter, those stories feel less abstract. You are not imagining emergence. You experience it each spring when you rise back into the light. You picture the smoke hole above the hearth as more than ventilation. It becomes a vertical connection. Earth below, sky above, fire in between. This alignment is not accidental. In many communities, daily life is organized around balance rather than dominance. The underground home reflects that philosophy physically. One long recognized aspect of Earth Lodge design is its circular form. Circles appear repeatedly in social organization, ceremonies, and art. Living in a round space reinforces ideas of continuity and shared presence. There is no front or back, no hidden corner where someone can disappear. Everyone exists within the same curve. You notice how rituals fit naturally into this environment. Seasonal ceremonies often occur indoors during winter when travel is difficult. The lodge becomes a sacred container. Songs echo softly. Drums vibrate through packed earth. The ground carries sound differently, deeper and steadier, as if listening. An intriguing detail appears in some lodge floors, where small pits or markings suggest intentional placement of offerings during construction or renewal. These gestures were not decorative. They marked the home as a living participant in spiritual life. Shelter and belief were built together. You sense how fire takes on layered meaning here. It warms, it cooks, it illuminates, but it also represents continuity. Fires are not allowed to die casually. Keeping them alive mirrors keeping community alive. Tending the hearth becomes a quiet responsibility with emotional weight. There is no single interpretation of how universal these spiritual meanings were. Some communities likely emphasize symbolism strongly. Others may have treated it more practically. What remains clear is that architecture and worldview were not separate spheres. They informed each other constantly. You imagine elders telling creation stories during storms, their words blending with wind muffled by earth. Children listen, feeling the story in their bodies as much as hearing it. Being underground makes the idea of coming from the earth feel immediate rather than distant. You also sense how death is understood differently in this context. Returning to the ground is not frightening. It is familiar. Living inside the earth each winter normalizes the idea of cyclical return. This perspective softens fear and reinforces continuity. Some modern scholars struggle to determine how much symbolism was intentional design versus layered meaning added over time. Did people build underground because of belief, or did belief grow because of living underground? The question resists a simple answer, and perhaps it does not need one. You feel how the home itself becomes a participant in ritual life. Certain spots are favoured for prayer or reflection. The central post may carry stories. The hearth becomes a focal point for gratitude and memory. Space is never neutral. As winter deepens, spiritual life intensifies not out of desperation but out of proximity. When people live close together, belief is shared more easily. Underground homes compress not just bodies but ideas. They create an environment where meaning circulates constantly. You sit quietly with this understanding. The underground home shelters flesh and story at the same time. It keeps bodies warm and narratives alive. That dual role gives it power beyond survival. As your thoughts drift forward, you realize that this connection to Earth also offers something else. Protection. Being unseen. Being sheltered not just from weather but from danger. Underground living carries advantages that extend beyond comfort and belief. It hides as much as it holds. Your attention turns toward that quieter benefit now where Earth becomes a shield as well as a home. You become aware of how little of the underground world is visible from above. Snow smooths everything into sameness. Wind erases tracks quickly. A village can exist just beneath the surface while appearing empty to anyone passing by. This invisibility is not accidental. It is another layer of protection built quietly into the landscape. Across many regions, winter conflict was a real concern. Competition for resources, territorial boundaries, and long-standing rivalries did not pause for cold weather. Living below ground reduced exposure. It limited silhouettes against the horizon. It dampened sound. Anyone approaching would have difficulty knowing how many people were present, or even if anyone was there at all. Physical traces from some winter settlements show entrances positioned away from direct sightlines, sometimes tucked behind natural rises or shaped snowbanks. This placement reduced the chance of surprise encounters. It also bought time. A few extra moments of warning could make the difference between safety and chaos. You imagine listening from inside as footsteps crunch faintly above. The sound is muted, uncertain. Earth absorbs vibration. You feel how this would steady nerves. Panic is less likely when threats feel distant rather than immediate. Calm thinking becomes possible. A curious but documented practice in some areas involved temporarily disguising entrances after snowfall, smoothing over tracks and blending openings into the surrounding terrain. This did not seal people inside. It simply made the home harder to read from the outside. Winter itself became camouflage. There is ongoing disagreement about whether underground living significantly reduced the frequency of raids or simply changed their nature. Some interpretations suggest attackers avoided hidden settlements altogether. Others argue that concealment mainly delayed confrontation. The material record hints at both outcomes depending on region and period. You sense how this concealment also protects from animals. Predators follow scent and sound. Underground homes contain both. Fires are controlled, food is stored carefully, odours disperse slowly through vents rather than billowing into open air. This reduces unwanted attention during scarce months. You imagine a blizzard rolling in suddenly. Visibility drops to nothing. Above ground, orientation is lost. Below, the world remains unchanged. Earth walls do not shift. The roof does not flap. Storms lose their power once they pass overhead. Another subtle advantage appears in how underground homes respond to fire risk. Flames cannot easily spread between structures when most of the building mass is soil. In tightly clustered winter villages, this containment matters. One accident does not automatically doom everyone. You feel the psychological comfort of being hidden. Not isolated, but sheltered from constant vigilance. Winter already demands enough energy. Reducing exposure to danger allows focus to return to routine and care. Some modern observers wonder whether this hidden life fostered suspicion or withdrawal. Others point out that seasonal emergence and trade kept connections active. Underground living was not permanent retreat. It was strategic withdrawal, timed and purposeful. You sit quietly, appreciating how protection does not always come from walls and weapons. Sometimes it comes from knowing how to disappear into the land that sustains you. As the night deepens, you realize that this safety is not absolute. Living underground introduces its own challenges. Dampness creeps in, mold threatens. Air can stagnate if attention slips. The earth gives warmth and cover, but it demands vigilance in return. Your thoughts shift naturally toward those challenges, now toward the less romantic side of underground living. Because survival is never free. It is negotiated daily through care, repair, and adaptation. You follow that thread, descending further into the realities that must be managed to keep these homes livable through the long winter months. You start to notice the parts of underground life that require constant attention. Warmth and safety do not come without trade-offs. The earth that shelters also holds moisture, and moisture has a way of creeping into everything if ignored. Underground homes succeed because people remain alert to small changes long before they become serious problems. Packed soil walls can sweat slightly as temperatures shift. You imagine fingers brushing along a surface, feeling for dampness. When moisture appears, action follows quickly. Fresh earth is added. Ventilation is adjusted. Fires are used strategically to dry the air without overheating the space. This balance is delicate, learned through seasons rather than instruction. Findings from excavated homes show repeated resurfacing of walls and floors, sometimes many times within a single generation. These layers are not signs of neglect. They are evidence of care. Each new layer responds to a specific need, sealing cracks, absorbing moisture, restoring stability. Maintenance is built into the lifestyle. You picture the smell changing when moisture builds. Earthy becomes musty. Smoke lingers longer than it should. These sensory cues matter. People respond to smell and feel faster than to abstract danger. Underground living sharpens awareness of subtle signals. One quietly clever practice uncovered in some regions involved mixing ash or fine sand into floor surfaces. This helped absorb moisture and reduce slipperiness. It also discouraged pests. The solution is simple, effective, and easy to refresh. It reflects problem-solving grounded in observation rather than theory. There is no single answer to how communities managed mold or mildew over long winters. Some analysts suggest frequent drying fires were key. Others believe design choices like ceiling height and vent placement played a larger role. What seems consistent is that neglect was not an option. Underground homes demanded engagement. You imagine someone waking early to adjust the smoke opening after a night of heavy snow. Too closed and air stagnates, too open and cold seeps in. These small daily decisions shape comfort and health more than dramatic actions ever could. You notice how tools used for maintenance are kept close. Scrapers, brushes, containers for ash and soil. Maintenance is not a separate chore. It is woven into daily routine. A wall is smoothed while talking. A floor is refreshed while children play nearby. Work and life overlap. An unusual observation from some sites is the presence of small drainage channels cut into floors near entrances. These shallow grooves guided meltwater away during thaws. They prevented pooling without complex construction. Gravity did the work. Awareness did the rest. You feel how this vigilance affects mindset. Living underground teaches that stability is not static. It must be renewed. That lesson applies beyond architecture. Relationships, routines, and resources all require attention. Winter reinforces this truth relentlessly. Some modern researchers question whether long-term underground living increased exposure to indoor pollutants. Others note that constant airflow management and regular cleaning likely mitigated many risks. The absence of written complaints does not mean absence of problems, but it suggests workable solutions existed. You imagine the relief of a dry, warm space after days of storm, the satisfaction of knowing that careful maintenance prevented discomfort. Pride settles quietly when effort pays off. You also sense how failure would feel immediate. A leak ignored becomes collapse. Stale air leads to headaches and fatigue. Underground homes punish inattention quickly. This sharp feedback loop trains behavior effectively. You sit with the understanding that these challenges do not diminish the ingenuity of underground living. They highlight it. Anyone can dig a hole. Keeping it livable through months of cold, damp and darkness requires discipline and knowledge. As winter stretches on, maintenance routines become almost automatic. Hands move without conscious thought. Adjustments are made before discomfort registers fully. This ease comes only after experience. You realize that underground homes are not passive shelters. They are dynamic systems that respond to weather use and time. People are part of that system, constantly tuning it. Your thoughts drift outward again toward longer timescales. Winters are not identical year to year. Climate shifts subtly, sometimes dramatically across generations. Underground living adapts to those changes too. Depth increases. Designs evolve. What works one century adjusts in the next. You feel yourself pulled toward that broader perspective now, toward the slow rhythm of climate itself, and how underground homes respond to forces larger than any single winter. The Earth remembers those changes even when people do not write them down. And so the story moves forward into time, measured not in days or seasons, but in centuries. You begin to sense time stretching beyond a single winter. Underground homes are not just responses to one cold season, but to patterns that repeat and slowly change. Climate does not stand still. It shifts in ways that are subtle at first, then unmistakable. People notice when winters arrive earlier, when snow stays longer, when spring hesitates. Environmental evidence gathered from pollen soil layers and settlement patterns shows that many regions experienced extended periods of colder weather over centuries. Communities adjusted quietly. They dug deeper. They reinforced roofs more heavily. They returned to underground living with greater commitment when surface shelters no longer felt reliable. Adaptation happened without announcements, guided by memory rather than measurement. You imagine elders recalling winters from their youth. This one colder, that one shorter. Stories become informal climate records. Decisions about how deep to dig or how thick to build are shaped by these recollections. The underground home becomes a response not just to present conditions but to remembered extremes. You notice how design slowly evolves. Earlier homes may sit closer to the surface. Later ones sink deeper. Entrances lengthen. Roof layers thicken. These changes are incremental, almost invisible from one generation to the next, but unmistakable when viewed across time. A subtle detail emerges in the archaeological record where older floors are found far below newer ones within the same site. This layering suggests repeated rebuilding in place, each version responding to changing conditions. People did not abandon successful locations easily, they modified them. There is uncertainty about how quickly communities recognize long-term climate shifts versus treating each harsh winter as an anomaly. Some evidence suggests gradual acceptance. Others point to sudden design changes following particularly severe periods. The truth likely varies, shaped by how extreme the changes felt in lived experience. You imagine a winter that lingers too long. Food runs low, fires burn more often. The underground home still holds, but strain is felt. That memory shapes future choices. Next time storage is expanded, roofs are reinforced earlier, preparation deepens. You feel how underground living offers flexibility in uncertain climates. Depth can be adjusted, insulation increased, ventilation refined. These homes are not fixed solutions, they are adaptable frameworks. One rarely mentioned observation involves how communities sometimes shifted the location of winter villages slightly over time, choosing ground with better drainage or more stable soil as conditions changed. Underground living allowed this movement without abandoning the concept entirely. You sense the patience required to live this way. Climate does not announce its intentions clearly. People respond with caution rather than panic. Changes are tested. If they work, they remain. If not, they fade quietly. Some modern researchers debate whether underground housing became more widespread during colder periods, or whether its use simply intensified. The distinction matters academically, but from inside the home the experience feels continuous. Winter comes, shelter adapts. You imagine standing in the same lodge used by ancestors generations earlier. The roof has been rebuilt, the floor raised, the entrance reshaped, yet the core idea remains unchanged. Go down to survive what comes from above. You feel a sense of continuity here that smooths anxiety. Climate shifts can be frightening, but underground living offers a sense of agency. People are not helpless. They respond thoughtfully using what they know best, the land beneath them. As your breathing slows, you realize that these long adaptations leave traces not just in soil, but in the way future observers read the past. Modern archaeologists step into these layered spaces, trying to understand choices made centuries ago. Their work depends on reading subtle clues left behind. Your attention drifts toward those observers, now toward the careful hands that brush soil away to reveal outlines of homes long collapsed. The underground shelters may be gone, but their impressions remain, and through them the story continues quietly waiting to be uncovered. You imagine the ground opening again, but this time not for shelter. It opens under careful hands centuries later as people kneel with brushes and trowels, listening as much as looking. The underground homes are no longer whole. Roofs have collapsed. Walls have slumped. Yet the soil remembers where people once lived, and it tells its story slowly. Modern archaeologists approach these sites with patience. They look for subtle changes in soil colour, faint circular outlines, compacted floors that resist erosion more than surrounding earth. These clues reveal where winter homes once held warmth and life. Even when wood and grass have vanished, the shape of human intention remains. You picture a shallow depression on the surface, almost invisible unless you know what to look for. To an untrained eye, it is nothing. To someone who understands underground architecture, it is an invitation. A former hearth location often shows darker soil from long-burned fires. Post holes appear as small stains where timber once stood. Together they form a readable pattern. Extensive fieldwork across North America confirms that these features appear repeatedly in cold-weather settlement zones, allowing researchers to map winter villages with surprising accuracy. Entire communities re-emerge from subtle impressions traced through careful excavation rather than dramatic discovery. You notice how slowly this work proceeds. Each layer is removed gently, every change is recorded. Archaeologists know that once soil is disturbed, its story cannot be retold. The pace mirrors the original construction. Care replaces urgency. An unexpected detail uncovered in some digs is the presence of repair layers that interrupt otherwise smooth floors. These patches indicate moments when something went wrong midwinter and had to be fixed quickly. Such details reveal not just design but lived experience. They show stress adaptation and resilience. You sense the challenge of interpretation. A dark patch might be a hearth, or it might be something else entirely. A post hole could belong to a roof support, or to a later modification. Context matters. Nothing is assumed lightly. There is ongoing discussion within the field about how confidently certain structures can be identified as winter homes rather than storage pits or ceremonial spaces. Some features overlap. Without written records, interpretation relies on comparison pattern and probability. Certainty is rare. You imagine an archaeologist pausing considering whether a structure's depth indicates climate response or social preference. The answer depends on many variables: soil type, location, associated artifacts. No single clue speaks alone. You feel how these excavations bridge time. The people uncovering these homes today rely on the same patience and attention to detail as the people who built them. Both read the earth carefully. Both respond to what it offers. In some cases, excavation reveals multiple homes built atop one another, each slightly different. These layers show change across generations. Design shifts, depth increases or decreases, entrances move. Climate culture and experience all leave marks. You notice how silence dominates these sites. No wind howls underground, no fire crackles. Just the sound of tools against soil. Yet the absence of noise feels full rather than empty. Life once filled these spaces and traces remain. Some researchers caution against overinterpreting what is found. A pattern might reflect convenience rather than intention. Others argue that repetition across regions points to shared understanding. The conversation continues, shaped by new finds and evolving methods. You imagine standing at the edge of an excavation at dusk. The pit below mirrors the shape of an ancient home. For a moment it feels possible to step back into winter centuries ago, to hear voices and feel warmth again. The ground holds that potential. As you turn away from the imagined site, you realize that archaeology does more than uncover structures. It reveals choices. Each underground home represents a decision to adapt rather than flee, to work with the land rather than fight it. Your thoughts move forward again toward the conversations that arise from these discoveries. Not all interpretations agree. Ideas clash gently, sometimes sharply, as scholars try to explain how underground living spread and why. The soil offers clues, but people must still argue their meaning. And so the story shifts into that quiet tension now, where evidence meets interpretation, and certainty remains just out of reach. You find yourself lingering in the space between certainty and question. The underground homes have been uncovered, mapped, measured, and yet their deeper story still shifts depending on who is telling it. Evidence sits quietly in the soil, but meaning is layered on top by human interpretation. This is where the calm confidence of facts softens into thoughtful disagreement. Researchers studying these structures agree on one thing. Underground winter homes appear in many places where cold and wind dominate for long stretches of the year. Their repeated presence alongside seasonal camps and food storage suggests intentional planning rather than coincidence. People did not stumble into these designs, they returned to them. Where interpretation becomes less settled is in how these ideas travelled. Some scholars see clear similarities between underground homes built far apart from roof support patterns to entrance placement. They suggest knowledge moved along trade routes and social connections carried by travellers long before written language fixed ideas in place. Others point out that digging into the earth is an obvious solution when cold becomes dangerous. They argue that similar environments naturally lead to similar answers, even among groups with little contact. In this view, underground living emerges independently, again and again shaped by climate rather than conversation. You imagine standing between these viewpoints, feeling both make sense. If you face a brutal winter with limited materials, going down is logical. At the same time, humans share stories as readily as goods. A successful idea rarely stays local for long. One curious observation that complicates the picture comes from regions where underground homes appear briefly and then disappear from the record. These short-lived experiments suggest trial rather than tradition. Perhaps the soil was wrong, perhaps flooding proved too risky, or perhaps social preference outweighed practical benefit. You sense how fragile certainty can be here. A collapsed roof does not announce why it was built in that way. A shifted entrance does not explain whether it reflects innovation or error. Archaeologists must read absence as carefully as presence. You picture debates unfolding quietly at conferences and field sites. One person gestures to post-hole spacing, another counters with soil analysis. Neither is wrong. They are simply interpreting fragments from different angles. There is also disagreement about how much symbolic meaning influenced design choices. Did people dig deeper because colder winters demanded it, or because spiritual beliefs favoured closeness to the earth? The answer may be both, but assigning weight remains difficult. You feel how this uncertainty does not weaken the story. It enriches it. It keeps the underground homes alive as subjects of curiosity rather than static facts. Each new excavation adds detail, but also raises new questions. Some modern researchers caution against imposing neat explanations on messy human behaviour. People do not always build for one reason. They respond to comfort, belief, memory, and habit all at once. Underground homes reflect that complexity. You imagine future discoveries waiting beneath fields and forests still hidden, ready to complicate everything again. The story is not finished. It is paused, resting quietly under layers of soil. As you step back from these debates, you notice how time moves on regardless of interpretation. Communities that once relied on underground homes eventually face changes far beyond climate. New arrivals, new pressures, new rules. The ground that once offered shelter could not protect against everything. Your thoughts drift toward that turning point now when underground living met forces it could not adapt to quietly. Contact with outsiders reshaped traditions, sometimes abruptly. The earth lodges remained, but the world around them changed. And so the calm story of winter survival begins to fracture, leading you gently toward the next chapter of transformation. You feel the shift before it is fully visible. The underground homes are still there, solid and familiar, but something presses in from the outside that cold weather never did. New sounds, new materials, new expectations. Contact arrives unevenly, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, and it changes how winter is lived. Early encounters with Europeans bring unfamiliar objects into underground homes. Metal tools appear sharper and more durable than bone or stone. Kettles replace some clay vessels. Cloth replaces hides in certain tasks. Archaeological layers show these items mixed with traditional materials, not replacing them all at once. Life adapts cautiously rather than flipping overnight. Written accounts from traders and explorers repeatedly describe earth lodges as warm, well-organized, and surprisingly comfortable. These observations are consistent across different regions and time periods. Outsiders often note the contrast between harsh conditions above and calm warmth below, sometimes with open admiration, sometimes with confusion. You imagine that moment of mutual observation. One group seeing underground living as clever and practical, the other seeing surface houses as fragile in winter. Neither perspective fully understands the other yet. Curiosity mixes with tension, A lesser-known detail appears in trade records where Earth Lodge communities become winter hubs for exchange. Their stable shelters allow them to host visitors during cold months when travel is dangerous. Underground homes unintentionally become points of contact, drawing in new influences along with goods. You sense how this visibility becomes a double-edged thing. What once hid communities now anchors them in place. Settlements become known, roots become established. Protection through concealment weakens as maps fill in. There is disagreement among historians about how quickly underground housing declined after contact. Some evidence suggests gradual change over generations. Other sites show abrupt abandonment following disease outbreaks or forced relocation. The pace of loss varies widely depending on region and circumstance. You feel the weight of new pressures. Fur trade economies shift priorities. Missions introduce new social structures. Military presence alters movement. Underground homes tied closely to seasonal rhythms and communal living begin to clash with imposed systems. In some places, people continue to build and use earth lodges despite these pressures. Repairs continue. Winter routines persist. This persistence shows resilience rather than resistance alone. Underground living still works even as the world around it becomes unstable. An overlooked observation comes from hybrid structures that combine traditional underground design with new materials like sawn lumber or metal fasteners. These homes represent adaptation rather than surrender. People use what is available while keeping what works. You imagine conversations within communities. Do we keep building this way? Do we try something new? What happens if we do not? These are not abstract debates. They are immediate and personal. Some scholars question whether underground homes make communities more vulnerable to external control by anchoring them to specific locations. Others argue that mobility had already shifted due to agriculture and trade long before. Again, cause and effect intertwine. You feel the sadness of change without letting it overwhelm you. Underground homes are not erased instantly. They fade unevenly, lingering in memory and practice even as new pressures mount. As winter passes and returns again, some lodges stand empty. Roofs sag without repair. Entrances fill slowly with soil. The earth reclaims what it once offered. You pause with that image. A warm space slowly cooling as care fades. It is not failure. It is transition, and transitions leave echoes. Your thoughts move forward gently toward the forces that formalize this change. Policies, borders, rules that leave little room for seasonal descent into the ground. The next chapter does not unfold naturally. It is imposed, and the underground homes feel that pressure deeply as the story continues. You feel the tightening before you see it clearly. The change is no longer slow or negotiable. Rules arrive with paper and ink carrying expectations that do not bend easily to climate or tradition. Underground homes, once shaped by winter and memory, now stand at odds with systems that prefer visibility, permanence, and control. Government policies begin to reshape how and where native communities are allowed to live. Reservations impose fixed boundaries. Seasonal movement, once essential to survival, is discouraged or outright forbidden. The rhythm of descending underground for winter and rising again in spring becomes difficult to maintain when movement itself is regulated. Records from the 19th century show increasing pressure on native peoples to adopt above-ground housing, modelled after European styles. Officials often describe earth lodges and pit houses as backward or unhealthy, despite centuries of successful use. This judgment ignores lived experience and replaces it with ideology. Comfort and survival give way to appearance and compliance. You imagine an underground home being judged by someone who has never spent a winter inside one. From above it looks primitive. From within it is warm, quiet, and secure. That contrast matters, but the power to decide no longer rests with those who live there. You sense how forced change disrupts more than architecture. Communal living becomes harder when individual family dwellings are mandated. Shared warmth is replaced by isolation. Fuel use increases. Winters feel longer and harsher, not because the climate changed, but but because shelter did. One quietly devastating detail emerges in reports describing how some underground homes were deliberately dismantled or filled in to encourage compliance with new housing standards. Roofs were removed, entrances collapsed. What had taken generations to refine could be erased in days. There is disagreement among historians about whether these policies were driven primarily by ignorance or by deliberate attempts to break communal structures. Some argue officials truly believed they were improving living conditions. Others point to clear evidence that disrupting traditional lifeways was an explicit goal. Intent, like impact, varies by place and time. You imagine families standing beside unfamiliar wooden houses, cold air slipping through gaps, fires burning constantly to compensate. The earth beneath them, once a reliable ally, is no longer allowed to be used. Knowledge that once ensured survival now feels suddenly irrelevant, even though winter has not softened. In some regions, underground living persists quietly despite official pressure. Homes are dug discreetly. Winter shelters are used out of sight. This continuation is not rebellion in the loud sense. It is persistence. Survival does not always announce itself. An overlooked observation from this period involves the blending of traditions within imposed structures. Some families dig cellars beneath mandated houses, creating partial underground spaces that restore a measure of insulation. These adaptations are subtle but telling. Old knowledge finds cracks to live in. You feel the emotional weight of this transition. Losing an underground home is not just losing a building. It is losing a way of thinking about winter, about community, about the relationship between people and land. Above-ground housing demands different behaviours, different rhythms. Not all of them fit. Some scholars continue to debate whether the decline of underground homes was inevitable given changing economies and technologies. Others argue that without forced policies, these structures might have evolved further rather than disappearing. The question lingers, shaped by what might have been. You imagine elders trying to explain to younger generations why they once lived underground. The stories feel distant now, almost unbelievable. Yet the memory remains carried quietly even when practice fades. As winters pass, the land slowly reclaims abandoned lodges. Roofs collapse inward. Entrances fill with soil. Snow settles smoothly over what was once home. To someone passing by, nothing seems missing. To those who remember, everything has changed. You pause with that image, letting it settle without rush. Change imposed from above rarely feels gentle. It leaves gaps not easily filled. Your thoughts drift toward what remains when practice fades. Knowledge does not vanish all at once. It lingers in stories, in habits, in subtle design choices passed down, even when the original context is gone. Underground homes may disappear from daily life, but they do not vanish from memory. You sense the story shifting again away from loss alone and toward what survives it. Because even when techniques fall out of use, they leave impressions. Oral history carries details that soil no longer reveals. And in those stories, underground homes continue to exist, waiting quietly to be remembered. You said use more diverse expressions, do not repeat them continuously in sections. A mainstream historical fact. Historians still argue whether a quirky tidbit. Scholars still debate ChatGPT said, understood. I'll continue to embed those elements invisibly with fresh language each time and no repeated phrasing cues or cadence. Whenever you're ready, say continue, and I'll deliver section 25, staying fully aligned with the outline and your stylistic rules. You feel the quiet thinning of presence now. Underground homes are no longer filled with firelight and conversation. They sit empty beneath the soil, known only to those who remember where to look. What once felt permanent begins to fade, not because it failed, but because the world around it changed too much. By the early 20th century, many underground winter homes had fallen out of regular use. This is not speculation. Settlement records, photographs, and oral accounts align in showing a sharp decline in earth lodge construction during this period. New housing expectations, restricted land access, and altered economies all played their part. Winter still came, but the old answers were no longer permitted or practical in the same way. You imagine walking across land that once held a winter village. The surface looks ordinary. Grass waves. Snow settles smoothly. Without guidance, you would never know that warmth once lived just below your feet. This invisibility is part of why so much knowledge nearly disappears. When practice stops, memory must work harder. A small but telling detail appears in early interviews with native elders conducted by anthropologists. Some describe underground homes with precise detail while admitting they'd never lived in one themselves. They learned about them through parents and grandparents. This gap marks a turning point. Knowledge survives, but experience does not. You sense how fragile oral transmission can be under pressure. Stories need space to be told repeatedly. When communities are disrupted, when language is suppressed, when daily life becomes dominated by survival, under new systems, those stories struggle to stay intact. There is uncertainty about how much underground building knowledge was lost entirely versus how much simply went dormant. Some techniques may have faded beyond recovery. Others may linger in fragments resurfacing later in unexpected ways. Loss is rarely absolute. You imagine tools stored away no longer used for digging. Skills that once lived in muscle memory soften with time. Hands that knew exactly how much pressure to apply now turn to other tasks. The body forgets what it is not allowed to practice. An unusual observation from reservation-era housing inspections notes complaints about cold floors and high fuel use in above-ground houses. These complaints echo the strengths of underground living without naming it directly. The old solutions still make sense even when they are no longer allowed. You feel the quiet frustration in that contradiction. Knowledge exists, it works, but it is treated as obsolete. This mismatch between effectiveness and acceptance deepens the sense of loss. Some historians suggest that underground living might have continued in modified form if communities had been allowed autonomy over housing design. Others argue that economic and material changes would have altered building practices regardless. Both views hold weight. What remains undeniable is that the transition was not chosen freely. You imagine elders pointing out subtle depressions in the ground to younger people. This was a home. This was where we stayed warm. The earth still remembers even if the roof is gone. These moments matter. They keep memory anchored to place. As decades pass, those depressions fill further. Ploughs flatten them. Roads cut through. Development smooths what little remained visible. The land grows quieter, but not empty. You pause and breathe slowly, letting the weight of near loss settle without becoming heavy. This is not a story of disappearance alone. It is a story of knowledge waiting. Because even when structures vanish, ideas persist. Underground living taught lessons about insulation efficiency and cooperation that do not vanish easily. They resurface in new forms, sometimes without acknowledgement. Your thoughts begin to lift slightly now. After loss comes remembering. After forgetting comes rediscovery. Knowledge that survives in fragments often waits for the right moment to return. You sense that moment approaching. Elders continue to tell stories. Descendants listen more closely. And outside these communities, others begin to look back with new curiosity. Underground homes, once dismissed, start to be seen again not as relics, but as wisdom. The story does not end in silence. It pauses. And in that pause, memory gathers strength. Your attention turns gently toward those voices that keep speaking, even when the ground above them has changed completely. You begin to hear voices more clearly now, not echoing in earth lodges, but carried through stories, pauses, and careful repetition. When underground homes fade from daily life, they do not vanish completely. They settle into oral memory carried by those who understand that forgetting is not the same as losing. In many native communities, elders continue to describe winter homes in detail long after the last one collapses. They speak of how deep to dig, how to angle an entrance, how the ground feels different once you pass the frost line. These descriptions are not nostalgic. They are precise, almost instructional, even when there is no immediate plan to build again. Recorded interviews from the early and mid-20th century preserve these accounts with striking clarity. Details about roof layering, hearth placement, and seasonal movement appear repeatedly across regions. This consistency suggests that underground knowledge remained active in conversation even when absent from the landscape. You imagine a winter evening in a modern home fire replaced by a stove walls thin compared to earth. An elder speaks anyway. The story begins with cold. It always does. Then comes the solution. Go down. Let the land help you. The listener may never dig a pit house, but the logic settles in quietly. One unexpected detail emerges in how some stories are told. Measurements are often given using body references rather than numbers. As deep as a person standing, wide enough for 4 families. These phrases preserve proportional knowledge without relying on tools. The body becomes the ruler. You feel how this way of teaching keeps information flexible. It adapts to different people, different soils, different times. Underground living becomes a principle rather than a rigid blueprint. There is still uncertainty about how much of this knowledge was intentionally preserved versus simply remembered because it mattered emotionally. Some stories may have been told for comfort rather than instruction. Others were likely meant as quiet reminders that different ways of living were once possible. You imagine younger listeners absorbing these stories differently over time. At first they sound like history. Later they sound like advice. Eventually they begin to sound like options. You notice how oral memory also preserves context. Stories rarely focus on structure alone. They include weather, hunger, cooperation, patience. Underground homes are described as part of a larger system of survival. This keeps the knowledge grounded rather than romanticized. A subtle but powerful observation comes from how often these stories emphasize listening to the land, not commanding it, not reshaping it aggressively, listening. That ethic carries forward into other practices, influencing how people hunt, farm, and build even above ground. You sense how memory resists erasure quietly. Policies can forbid building, schools can discourage language, but stories slip through cracks. They are told while cooking, while walking, while watching snowfall. They survive because they are useful. Some modern scholars debate whether oral accounts can be trusted as technical sources centuries after use has stopped. Others argue that repeated consistency across unrelated communities strengthens their reliability. The discussion continues, but the stories remain. You imagine standing with someone who points to a field and says, "This used to be warm in winter." The ground does not contradict them. It holds the imprint even if you cannot see it. As time moves on, these memories begin to meet new curiosity. Younger generations ask different questions. Architects and environmental thinkers begin to listen. The old stories suddenly sound relevant again in a world grappling with energy and climate. You feel that shift beginning. Underground homes move from memory toward inspiration, not as replicas, but as teachers. The earth once again offers lessons to those willing to listen. Your breathing slows as the story gently turns toward that renewal. The past is no longer only behind you. It begins to surface, influencing present choices in unexpected ways. And with that, you feel yourself stepping toward a modern moment where ancient ideas quietly return wearing new language. You begin to notice a quiet echo between past and present. Ideas that once lived only in memory start appearing in new forms, spoken with different words but carrying familiar logic. Underground homes, long dismissed as outdated, begin to surface again in conversations about efficiency, sustainability, and comfort. In recent decades, architects and engineers have returned to the concept of earth-sheltered housing. This is not speculation. Building journals and experimental homes show renewed interest in structures partially or fully set into the ground to regulate temperature naturally. What once kept families alive through brutal winters now attracts attention for reducing energy use and stabilizing indoor climates. You imagine a modern home tucked into a hillside, its roof covered with soil and native plants. From the outside, it blends quietly into the land. Inside, the temperature remains steady year-round. Heating and cooling demands drop dramatically. The logic mirrors what native builders understood long ago, even if the language has changed. A quietly fascinating detail appears in some of these modern designs. Builders often rediscover features like angled entrances, compact layouts, and central living spaces through trial and error, unaware that these elements echo ancient practices. Innovation circles back on itself more often than people like to admit. You sense how these rediscoveries spark conversations. Some designers openly acknowledge indigenous influence. Others present the ideas as new. Either way, the knowledge proves resilient. It works regardless of who names it. There is uncertainty about how directly modern earth-sheltered homes should replicate traditional underground designs. Some argue that historical forms arose from specific cultural contexts and should not be copied casually. Others believe the principles can be adapted respectfully without imitation. The discussion remains active and nuanced. You imagine descendants of underground home builders seeing these modern structures. Some might feel recognition. Others might feel frustration that ideas once dismissed now gain praise when repackaged. Both reactions make sense. You notice how climate concerns drive this renewed interest. Extreme weather returns, energy costs rise. People look for ways to live more comfortably without constant mechanical intervention. The Earth offers the same answer it always has. Go down, let the land help. A subtle observation comes from how often these modern homes prioritize quiet. Thick earth walls muffle sound just as they did centuries ago. Residents describe calm focus and improved sleep. These benefits echo experiences described in old stories without needing explanation. You feel how the underground concept expands beyond housing, food storage, community spaces. Even public buildings experiment with partial burial for thermal stability. The idea spreads quietly without fanfare. Some researchers question whether modern materials and technologies truly improve on ancient designs or simply complicate them. Others point out that combining old principles with new tools allows greater flexibility and safety. The balance between simplicity and innovation continues to be explored. You imagine walking through one of these contemporary earth-sheltered spaces. It feels familiar even if you have never lived underground. The calm is immediate. The outside world softens. You realize that comfort does not always come from addition. Sometimes it comes from subtraction. You breathe slowly, recognizing the continuity. Knowledge does not move in straight lines. It loops, fades, and returns when conditions align. Underground homes are not relics. They are reminders. As this thought settles, you feel the story shifting again. Rediscovery leads naturally to reflection. What do these ancient solutions teach about the future? About how people might choose to live as climates grow less predictable? The answer does not shout. It waits patiently, like warmth held in soil. Your attention drifts toward those lessons now, toward the quiet wisdom embedded in earth and patience. The journey is nearing its end, but understanding continues to deepen. You move forward gently, ready to reflect on what underground living offers beyond survival alone. You slow down now, letting ideas settle rather than rushing past them. Underground homes stop being historical examples and start feeling like lessons. Not instructions, but suggestions offered quietly by the land itself. When you look closely, these homes are less about the past and more about restraint, efficiency, and respect for limits. One thing is clear from both ancient settlements and modern experiments. Earth-sheltered spaces require far less energy to remain livable than exposed structures. Thick soil buffers, temperature swings naturally. Heat gained is not lost quickly. Cold struggles to penetrate deeply. This principle holds true whether you're using packed dirt and grass or concrete and modern waterproofing. The Earth does not change its behavior based on era. You imagine how much labour was saved by not fighting the environment constantly. Fires burned smaller. Repairs happened less often. People slept more deeply. In a world where survival depended on conserving strength, this mattered more than comfort alone. You notice how underground living encourages humility. Builders did not try to dominate the landscape with height or visibility. They worked with slope soil and gravity. The result was shelter that felt grown rather than imposed. That mindset feels increasingly relevant in a world facing resource limits. An interesting but often overlooked detail is how underground homes naturally regulate humidity, as well as temperature when properly maintained. The balance between ventilation and insulation creates stable air that protects both people and stored goods. This stability is difficult to achieve in lightweight surface structures without mechanical systems. You sense how this teaches patience. Underground homes are not quick builds. They demand planning and cooperation. They reward foresight rather than urgency. That rhythm contrasts sharply with modern habits of speed and replacement. There is still discussion among designers and historians about whether ancient underground homes represent an ideal model for future living or a context-specific solution that should not be generalized. Some argue that climate culture and community structure were essential components that cannot be separated. Others believe the core principles stand regardless of context. The debate reflects differing ideas about progress itself. You imagine explaining underground living to someone unfamiliar with it. It sounds counterintuitive at first. Go underground to stay warm. Hide to feel safe. Use less fire to stay warmer. Yet once experienced, the logic becomes obvious. The land has always known how to moderate extremes. You notice how these homes also model shared responsibility. Because maintenance affects everyone, care becomes collective. Waste and excess are immediately visible. That transparency encourages moderation without enforcement. A subtle insight comes from how underground living reduces exposure to constant noise and visual stimulation. Thick earth walls create mental quiet as well as physical shelter. People living this way likely experienced a different relationship with attention and rest. Calm was built into the environment. You feel that calm now as you sit with the idea. Underground homes remind you that sustainability is not always about new technology. Sometimes it is about remembering what already works and applying it thoughtfully. As the world faces colder storms in some places and hotter extremes in others, the lessons feel timely. Use mass to stabilize temperature. Reduce exposure rather than compensate endlessly. Design for the long term rather than the moment. You breathe slowly, letting the weight of these ideas settle gently. The underground home is not a prescription. It is a reminder that comfort and survival do not require constant struggle. They require alignment. Your thoughts begin to narrow again, returning from broad lessons to a single quiet image. Snow falling, wind passing overhead, warmth held below. The simplicity of that picture carries more wisdom than it first appears. You sense the story nearing its end now. Not closing abruptly, but easing towards stillness. There is one more moment to linger in, one final return to the underground space itself. A chance to stand quietly, feel its calm fully, and then rise back into the present, carrying that calm with you. You let everything narrow into a single moment. No arguments, no timelines, just presence. Snow falls steadily above you, layer by layer, softening the world into silence. Down here beneath the surface, nothing moves unless it needs to. The underground home holds steady, doing exactly what it was shaped to do. You imagine standing alone for a moment in the centre of the space. The fire has burned low, not out, just resting. Warmth lingers in the walls and floor, stored patiently by the earth. This is not heat that rushes or overwhelms. It is the kind that waits for you to notice it. Across many excavated winter homes, soot patterns and compacted floors show long periods of quiet use rather than constant activity. These places were not always bustling. They allowed stillness. People did not need to fill every moment with movement, because survival did not demand it constantly. Rest had a place here. You listen to the faintest sounds, a log settling, breath moving in and out. Somewhere above wind passes without finding a way in. The separation feels complete. The underground home creates a boundary that winter cannot cross easily. A small but striking detail from several sites shows sleeping areas worn more deeply than work areas, suggesting long hours of rest during the coldest months. This challenges the idea that survival required constant effort. Sometimes it required stillness, letting the body recover, letting the earth do its work. You feel how darkness here is not empty. Firelight flickers softly, shadows move gently. There is no harsh contrast, just gradation. This environment invites the mind to slow down, to wander without urgency. Some researchers have wondered whether such prolonged quiet altered perception of time. Days may have felt longer, nights may have blended together. The absence of constant external cues allows inner rhythms to guide experience. Whether this felt comforting or disorienting likely varied from person to person. You imagine lying down, feeling the firmness of the floor beneath, bedding the warmth rising slowly. The ceiling feels close but not pressing. It reminds you that you are held, not trapped. An understated observation comes from how rarely these spaces show signs of frantic modification during winter months. Most changes happen before or after the season. During the coldest periods, the goal is stability, not improvement. That restraint reflects trust in the design. You breathe deeply and feel your shoulders drop. The underground home does not demand attention once it's functioning. It allows focus to drift inward. Thoughts soften. Worries shrink to manageable size. You realize that this is the true gift of underground living. Not just survival, but relief. Relief from constant vigilance. Relief from exposure. Relief from the need to fight the environment at every moment. Snow continues to fall above unheard. Inside time stretches comfortably. This is what winter can be when shelter works. Not an enemy to battle, but a season to inhabit. You stand there a little longer, letting the calm imprint itself. The memory feels transferable. You do not need to live underground to carry it with you. The lesson is portable. Find ways to buffer extremes. Create spaces that hold warmth and quiet. Trust in what is slow and steady. As this realization settles, you sense yourself preparing to move, not abruptly, gently, the way one rises from rest rather than sleep. The underground space does not cling. It releases when it is time. Your thoughts begin to lift toward the surface again, toward air and light and present-day concerns, but something stays with you. A groundedness. A reminder that safety does not always come from height or visibility. Sometimes it comes from depth. You take one last slow breath in the underground calm. The fire glows faintly. The earth holds steady. And with that you begin the quiet return, carrying the stillness upward, ready to let the story soften into its final rest. You rise slowly now, not standing up all at once, but easing your awareness upward the way morning comes after a long night. The underground home remains behind you, steady and unchanged while you carry its calm forward. Snow still rests above it. Wind still moves across the land. Yet the urgency they once carried has softened. You imagine climbing the entrance passage, feeling the temperature shift gradually rather than sharply. This transition is intentional. Underground homes never force you abruptly back into the world. They prepare you for it. Cold air brushes your face, but it no longer feels hostile, it feels manageable. Across many former winter village sites, entrances show signs of heavy use, followed by long abandonment suggesting people left these homes deliberately, rather than fleeing them. Departure was part of the design. These structures were not traps. They were seasonal partners entered and exited with care. You step out into pale daylight. The landscape looks wide again. Sounds carry farther. Wind touches you fully, yet something has changed. You understand now why the ground beneath your feet once mattered so much. It was not chosen out of fear, but out of understanding. You pause and look back, knowing that nothing visible marks the home you just left. The surface gives no hint of the warmth below. This invisibility feels fitting. The most important things often do not announce themselves. A quiet detail from historical accounts describes how people often paused briefly after leaving underground homes, adjusting to light and space before continuing on. That pause mattered. It honoured the transition between protected and exposed worlds. You take that pause now. There remains uncertainty about how many underground homes still lie undiscovered beneath modern landscapes. Some may never be found. Others will surface unexpectedly during construction or erosion. Their presence reminds us that history is not always behind us. Sometimes it is directly beneath us. You feel gratitude rather than nostalgia. Underground living was not perfect. It required work, attention, and cooperation. But it offered something rare. Stability in an unstable season. Quiet in a loud world. Warmth without excess. As you turn fully toward the present, you realize the story does not ask you to replicate these homes. It asks you to notice their logic. Slow down. Buffer extremes. Share warmth. Listen to the land you live on, whatever form it takes. You walk away now, leaving the imagined entrance to disappear under snow again. The earth closes gently, holding its knowledge without complaint. It has done so for centuries, and as your steps carry you forward, the pace of thought softens. The story loosens its grip, no longer teaching or explaining, just resting. The world feels quieter. Breath slows, muscles release. There is no rush to think further. What mattered has already settled. You are warm. You are safe. The ground beneath you, whether you notice it or not, continues to do its quiet work. Now let everything fade just a little more. Let images blur. Let effort dissolve. You do not need to hold on to anything anymore. Sleep comes the same way warmth does underground, gradually, patiently, without force. You let the story slow even further now, as if it knows you no longer need guidance. The images soften at the edges. The underground home fades from a place you can picture clearly into a feeling that stays with you instead. A sense of being held. A sense of steadiness that does not demand effort. Your breathing evens out without instruction. Each inhale feels quieter than the last. Each exhale releases something you did not realize you were carrying. The world above ground, with its noise and sharpness, drifts farther away. It does not disappear. It simply loses its urgency. You imagine the earth again, patient and unmoving, holding warmth long after the fire has dimmed. That patience spreads into you. There is no need to solve anything now. No need to plan. The people who dug those homes understood this rhythm. Work when it is time to work. Rest when rest is possible. Trust that the ground will keep doing its part. Thoughts slow into longer, gentler shapes. They do not collide anymore. They pass like clouds, soft and unremarkable. If one drifts away unfinished, that is fine. Nothing important is being missed. Your body follows suit. Shoulders loosen. Jaw relaxes. The small muscles around your eyes let go. You feel heavier in a pleasant way, like settling into packed earth that remembers your shape. The cold no longer exists here. Neither does effort. Only a quiet warmth that does not flicker or demand attention. It is steady, reliable, the kind of warmth that lets sleep arrive on its own terms. If sounds remain around you, they soften too. They become distant, unimportant, easily ignored. Your attention turns inward, then slowly dissolves altogether. You do not need to picture anything else. The story has already done its work. Like those underground homes, it has sheltered you long enough for rest to feel natural again. So let go now. Let the last traces of movement fade. Let the ground, imagined or real, hold you gently. There is nothing left to listen for, nothing left to do. Just rest. Sweet dreams.